Okay, that's meeting being recorded. Thank you, Anne. Okay, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Integration Joint Board. I rule that under Standing Orders 5.6 and 5.81, this meeting has been held by remote participation due to the current restrictions and the impact on public attendance at meetings of the IJB. Whilst the public are excluded from attendance at this meeting under the terms of the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020, members of the local media are in attendance via remote link. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be published online for public access after the meeting. Can all participants online please switch off their cameras and mute microphones when not speaking? If you need to speak on any point, please use the raise the hand function in Teams or indicate your wish to speak by signalling on your camera or taking your microphone off mute. Officers are reminded to follow the protocols that have been separately issued with regard to their participation. And before we start the meeting, can I please ask the committee officer to do a roll call just for members to indicate that they are present?
Good afternoon. I'll do a roll call of voting and non-voting members only. Mrs. Cornick?
Present.
Ms. Haswell?
Present.
We have apologies for Mr. Fraser, and Mr. Floss is attending as a substitute. Mr.
Present.
Floss?
Yeah,
Thank
present.
you. Mrs. MacDonald?
Present.
Mr. McGregor?
Present.
Miss Manson?
Here.
Mr. Chittick?
Present.
Mr. Williamson?
Present.
Miss Morgan?
Present.
Dr. Einerson, can I confirm that's the correct pronunciation of your surname?
Yes, correct. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Miss Watson?
Present.
Mr. Sandilands? I'm not sure he has joined. I'll add him as apologies if he doesn't attend. Ms. Gens?
Present.
Ms. Hand is substitute for third sector representative. And Mr. Guyan.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Lisa. Okay. And do we have any declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any hands being raised. Oh, Shona, have you come off mute, Shona? Okay. And if we could just move on to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of November, firstly. Is anybody happy to move those minutes?
Happy to move.
Thanks. Natasha, did you have your hand up?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you very much. And then for the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of December. Anyone?
Happy to approve.
Thanks,
Happy to
Jane.
approve, Jane.
Happy to second, Shona.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is appointment of non-voting member.
Thank you, Chair. Jan Risa here. Yes, it's my report. It's really just a straightforward report to reflect changes that have taken place in the head of the Voluntary Action Shetland establishment, and this is a recommendation that you accept the appointment of Lynn Tulloch as that representative going forward. In the interim, you have Wendy Hand still in attendance as substitute, and you'll notice that it is for a short term, so there will be a further report later in the summer to reflect a renewal of appointment then, but this is a straightforward report to deal with the situation as is today.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Risa. Any questions on this report, anybody? No. Anybody have any comments? No, I'm not seeing anybody come off mute. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Mrs. Hewson for her contributions while she was a member and wish her well in her retirement from VAS. I'm sure she'll be kept busy in her other role. And we look forward to welcoming Lynn when she joins, and also just to thank Wendy for standing in and for her contributions. Anybody have anything else to add, or are we happy to do that and move on? Yep. Okay, we will move on then to item 2, which is the update on nursing models for islands with small populations. And Edna Mary Watson, I believe, is going to take us through this one.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Indeed, we have spoken at the IJB before about the islands with small populations and the nursing service on there. So I think members are probably versed in some of the challenges that we have. But just in case anybody's not, obviously this is the small islands, the outer islands of Fair Isle, Fulla, Fetlar and Skerries that we're talking about. All of these islands have a relatively small resident population, and they had to date resident nursing model that provided a 24/7 service. There have been some challenges in terms of providing that service, in terms of being working time not being working time compliant, but also in terms of the difficulty in recruiting to some of these posts. And this paper highlights the fact that over the summer in 20, we had resignations of 3 of the post holders from Fair Isle, Fetlar and Skerries, which just further supported the need to actually review this. So the paper outlines what we've done since then, and essentially we've set up a small working group on each of the islands, and taking the same or a very similar approach to the work that we did undertake with the Bressay Community Council and the people living on Bressay in the Caring for Bressay project. So really looking at what are the health and care needs on the island, how do we provide that service currently, and how can we better provide that going forward, as I say, and trying to address the challenges that we've got in terms of working time, skills fade, which happens because the population is small, and therefore the demand of a clinical person on island 24/7 is not huge, and it is difficult for people to keep up their skills working a small volume of activity there. Some of the challenges are outlined in the paper at 4.7, and I'm sure people have probably read them. So in terms of the work that we've done with the communities, we've set up these small groups that's got representatives from both health and care, representatives from community councils, from other interested parties. So for example, on Fair Isle, we have some of the National Trust and the Bird Observatory people. And we've been trying to focus on, the entire model of care, so how we would deliver scheduled services to people as well as in the emergency time frame. And that has now led us to the position where we've identified 4 possible models that we're really discussing with each of the communities. And these are set out in the paper at section 4.21. I'll just briefly run over those. So we have an option that's about a resident nurse cover. We know on-call commitment. That, of course, would be a working time compliant model, but it does not provide on-island cover for the out-of-hours period, which, of course, is an issue of concern for people. But it would enable us to standardise the approach to out-of-hours provision across Shetland by the use of NHS 24's 111 service in the out-of-hours period. The second option that we've been discussing with people is a rotational model where we would have perhaps 2 staff members who would work on a pattern, a bit like offshore working, where people do 2 weeks on, and then a second post holder would do the next 2 weeks, and they would rotate that throughout the course of the year. And that indeed is how NHS Orkney deliver their model on outer islands. We've provided an option C, which was another rotational model, but that was looking at just having an on-island presence of probably a district nurse on a kind of Monday to Friday basis, again with no on-call, and that person would be part of the wider district nursing workforce for Shetland, which would then help to address some of the isolation feedback that we've had that post holders feel when they're working on a small island on their own. If they were truly part of the bigger, wider team, then being out on the islands for a little period of time would be less of an issue of concern for them. And then option D is really what we've described in the paper as a hybrid model, which is something that we're in the process of developing really with the Fair Isle community in particular. And this one's looking at a much more flexible approach to the actual resident nurse role. So what we're suggesting here is that we would have a resident nurse. We would utilise the ability to be able to open that job up to a 48-hour working week, and how we would manage that would be having a very variable approach as to the amount of time that's spent doing clinic scheduled time and how much time is in the on-call commitment, but again still within the 48 hours. General advice and information are available for people through sites like NHS Inform, which provides a lot of good self-help, self-management advice and support for people. And then again, they would be able to utilise the NHS 24's 111 for clinical discussion if there was something that they needed in the out of hours period. In the discussions that we've had with the Fair Isle community, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are part of that conversation, and the volunteers there have agreed, along with the Scottish Ambulance Service, to look at their current skill set and see if there were additional skills that they could take on that would perhaps enable them to participate in the delivery of an on-call service, because this model, even though the nurse would provide some on-call, would not provide a 24/7 on-call service like they'd had to date. And in addition, through these conversations, the ambulance service were also highlighting that through their move to using more and more digital technology, they're actually trialling currently, I think in Orkney, the use of mobile technology, so mobile phones, iPhones, to enable them to communicate with people remotely. So the suggestion here is that we try that on Fair Isle in terms of both upskilling the fire and rescue staff, but also providing a direct link to the Scottish Ambulance Service paramedics here in Larwick, who would provide advice and support. And obviously, whilst they could do that for the fire and rescue staff, they are obviously the experts in pre-hospital care. And so, we would see that that is something that perhaps they would offer to the nurse too. Then, of course, we would still have the traditional 999 service in place for emergencies. So that's as far as we've really got in terms of working up the models. We recognise that each of the communities have some different priorities and different things that are perceived to be more important to them, or that is more important according to their demographic or their location. So we're suggesting also in the paper that there is room for adjustment within some of these. So, for example, we know that Skerries has now become a place where there is a much greater population at the weekends rather than weekdays. So we're suggesting that actually that model should maybe move, that the resident post holder actually works over a weekend and has days off during the week to better support that community. And in addition, that is of course an ageing community, and so we would look to add social care activities back into the nursing post there, because there is no social care on island provision either. So I think this is a piece of work that is in progress, and we're continuing to have good conversations with each of these communities about how we try and tailor something that really fits their needs. From the conversations that we've had so far, they were also keen that we included Fuller in these conversations. Fuller currently has a resident nurse service in post, but having had discussions with both the development officer and the local community councillor, they too agree that it would be better to have a look for their future, at a time when they have a post holder in place and there is therefore not such a pressing need to quickly redesign a service for them. So they're happy to progress with that, and we're just setting up a small group there to take that forward too. The rest of the paper tells you what the next steps are once we kind of move this on a bit, about making sure that the area clinical forum within the NHS board and the partnership forum is content with the staff governance arrangements that are in place and the overall professional view on whatever new model we opt for. And obviously any new model has to comply with NHS Scotland policies, procedures, and also the Nursing and Midwifery Council guidance. So I think I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions on the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Edna Mary. Do we have any questions? Okay, Wendy's got her hand up first. Go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah, I suppose it's an observation that the third sector are not mentioned in the document at all, and I think they would be key for, obviously not for anything clinical, but obviously around the sort of the well-being and potentially the care element. So I think there is certainly a scope for somebody to be involved in the working group there.
Thank you. Wendy, do you want to come back on that, Edna?
Yeah, just to say, absolutely happy for that, Wendy. You can and we can liaise with you out with how we best do that, whether it's people in each of the small localities or whether it's via a central source like yourself.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Shona?
Sorry, too many buttons to press. It was really just to say a really brilliant project, and I like the idea of the overarching model, but with the flexibility. You kind of answered my question, which was it might be that you end up with a different model for each island depending on the specific needs and skills of different people there. So I just think it's a really innovative and exciting project, and I guess also if the recruitment, once that process is up and running, demonstrates the flexibility, that the post holder might dictate some of how it ends up looking. So it's just, there's so many factors, but I think it's a really good piece of work. Thank you.
Thanks, Shona. Does anybody else have any questions? There's 2 hands up, but it doesn't tell me who they are, which is really helpful. Jim, I think. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just wondering then, do you have any idea, on a sort of timescale before we could sort of finalise this, with your discussions with the remote islands? I mean, it's just to give us an idea. Is it going to take us 6 months to get all this up together, or 3 months? That was all. Just hoping.
Thanks, Tim. Go ahead, Edna.
Thanks. The original intent was that we were hoping by the end of January to have gotten to a place where we were, ready to proceed to advert. But I suppose the honest answer is the more conversations we've had, the more we've begun to tease out what some of these models might look like. And then 1 or 2 of the other community councils have said that, oh, well, maybe we could really look at that. So we're going to have an open session on Fetlar to really explore these in detail with the community there. And so that session's planned for the 2nd of March. So I am hoping that really by the time we get to the end of March, we'll have got to a place where we've got an agreement perhaps on all 3 of the islands that currently have no nurse, on which model they would like, because I think there would be something too in being able to put out a kind of big generic advert roundabout. That these are island opportunities, but there is probably some difference in terms of what each post might look like, etc., because that might actually attract a cadre of people who then begin to think, well, actually I prefer that island and that approach, or this one and this style of working.
Thanks very much. Do you want to come back, Jim?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
I think I've got Jane next.
Thank you. Yes, I echo. It's a really good. We've been on the journey with you as you've kept us informed as you've gone along, and that's really helpful as well. Just one question and then a comment. Just for the option B, the rotational model, and it talks about being based on the NHS advanced practitioner. I'm just wondering if that is, are you considering an advanced practitioner nurse or not? I'm just thinking of the resources there.
I think that's some of the challenges, I say, and how this is evolving. These models are really how we laid them out to begin with. And so in terms of option B there, we have had the conversation because as you've already alluded to, some of the challenge of this might be about recruitment. and we recognise that the higher skilled person with a very low workload, we may not recruit somebody to it, or if we do, they may not stay long. So we have already had some conversations on Fetler in particular, because they were quite keen on that, as to whether actually should it be an advanced practitioner, or are we better off with a band 6 district nurse type post holder. So as I say, we're still in these conversations about really teasing that out, about what is it that people are really looking for, or that what would meet the need on that specific island. So at this moment in time, anybody that's really considering this one, it's really about the working pattern of the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, which for some of the islands felt okay. For Fair Isle, they particularly want a resident person to be part of the community, as opposed to somebody that comes and provides a service on a rotational basis. So there are some little nuances that have appeared in these conversations that we've had with the islands.
Thank you. That answers my question. It was about that sustainability of that particular skill set there. So thank you for that. And just to say that the full range of access to all the services, that's really at the core here, and I see that very clearly. So thank you for the update. And it's good to know that there is cover on all the islands at present, and you make that very clear in your report. So thank you for that, Edna Mary.
Thank you, Jane. Any further questions for Edna Mary? I have a quick question. It's maybe more of a comment than a question. I suppose just how much time has this taken up? I appreciate that you're really busy with other things at the minute, so I suppose I'm concerned about your capacity and just the, you say you're hoping to get this finished by March, but I appreciate that you must be heavily involved in vaccination. And I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that don't set yourself timelines that are not achievable based on everything else you have on, I suppose.
Thank you for that very kind acknowledgement. Yeah, like everybody, we are a bit pressed around about the vaccination campaign, but obviously that's really important for people too. So I actually think the island communities have been quite accommodating of that too, because Fair Isle have already given us a little bit of a leeway gap to enable us to get on with some of the vaccination stuff, and then we'll get back on to discussing this model with them further. So I think we are trying to go on a realistic time frame, but also conscious of the fact that actually these islands are living without their normal nursing model, so that there is some pressure to get that addressed for them as well. So trying to progress this as best as we can. Tends to be that these island meetings are on an evening, so in one way that's easier to accommodate.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Just make sure that you all look after yourselves as well. I think that would be my comment. But thank you. Does anybody have any further questions? Okay, I think you're done with questions, Edna Mary. Thank you. Has anybody got any comments on this one that they want to add? I'm not seeing anybody's hands come up. I think it does show that the working with people is definitely the best option to give the best solutions. So I would welcome continuing to hear how this update goes, and I appreciate that we've been kept updated all the way. So thank you very much for that. And we're just been asked to note this, I believe. Yeah, are we all happy to do so?
Happy to note.
Yep, happy to note. That's super. Okay, thank you very much, Edna Mary, and we will move on to item 3, which is the approval of logo for use on Health and Social Care Partnership business. And Jo, are you maybe presenting on this one?
Thank you, Chair. This paper is introducing the concept of a logo for use on the Shetland Islands Health and Social Care Partnership activity. When the IJB came into being in the initial sort of integration arrangements, the decision was made not to have a separate logo for the partnership. But through the sort of COVID period, there was quite a lot of feedback from staff that they did really want some way of demonstrating to the community that that they were, you know, working extremely jointly together. And I think we have kind of shown that through the COVID period. So right at the very beginning of COVID, communications in the council were asked to develop a logo, and they came up with a number of possible logos, one of which is presented in this paper. There was no formal feedback process. Obviously, we were in the or formal consultation process. Obviously, we were right in the depths of the COVID pandemic, so it was developed quite quickly and it was shared around. And I have to say that the feedback that we received was very positive. However, we had made the mistake in that we had not either consulted the IJB or given the IJB the chance to approve the logo. Hence, we are playing catch up here in bringing this paper to you today for your views on whether or not the Health and Social Care Partnership should have a logo. And then if there is agreement to have a logo, is the one presented to you in this paper the one that you would want to use? So I think that's pretty much it. It's a fairly short and sweet paper, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Jo. I'll open this up for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Jim.
Yet again, I come in. I think the only thing I think is lacking is the fact that there's no mention of integrated joint board here. I mean, it just talks about the health, Shetland Community Health and Social Care Partnership. Right? Now, what I'm looking at is people going to be, you know, still a little bit confused of, you know, oh, is this another organisation we've got, and we've got the integrated joint board? That's my only feeling, is that I think that if we're going to use this term integrated joint board, that has to be part of the logo.
Would you like to come back, Jo?
I think that's a very fair point, Jim. The ability for the public as well as ourselves to distinguish between what the IJB is and what the Health and Social Care Partnership is a really complex distinction to make. And I do think that is something we do need to consider quite carefully. I think that's a really valid point to make. Certainly one of the issues is around, one of the audit recommendations was around having a sort of clear website presence for the IJB and around the Health and Social Care Partnership, and that is something we've come up against in terms of how do we, make sure that that is seen as, you know, we're not wanting in any way, shape or form to be separate from the council and the NHS, but how do we distinguish what is IJB business? So I think that's a very valid point, and one that we'd be very happy to go away and do a bit more work on if that was the request of the IJB.
Thanks very much, Jo. Do you want to come back in at all, Jim?
No, as I say, I'm happy. I mean, you know, Jo understands my, you know, what I was getting at.
Okay, thank you. I've got Stephen Flaws next.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Jim raised a valid point there. And I think when I read the report, given I'm just a substitute, I sort of was having to ask the question, has this been discussed previously? Because it read as if the cart had gone before the horse here, and there was somebody decided there was a logo that was required. And I think in the report, I'm not really clear who it is that's decided there needs to be a logo. Is it? And I think unless you're involved with it, the differentiation between Shetland Community Health and Social Care Partnership and IJB to show plugs in the public I think is a bit confusing at the moment. It's really just a comment following on from Jim there.
Thanks very much for that, Stephen. Shona, you're next.
Hi, yeah, it kind of follows on from what Jim and Stephen both said, but I suppose I do agree. I think there should be a logo, and I totally tick the point that Jim was making in terms of what's it actually called. And I think I do recall some discussion that this was what we were going to describe it as. So I guess, you know, whatever we decide to describe the IJB, the Shetland Health and Social Care Partnership, or a bunch of bananas, it doesn't really matter. But then we need to do that everywhere we go. So like the title of our meeting today would be the same with a logo. And then only then do people stop being confused. So I think the logo is fine, but then we need to all start using that same name every time we refer to any business that we're involved in.
And Joe, do you want to come back in?
I was just going to say, I think those are all fair points. I think the other thing to bear in mind in this is the Derek Feely report that was just published just very recently, which did talk about the changing nature of IJBs. And of course, we don't know exactly what that will be in the future, but I think that is also something to take into account in this debate.
Thank you, Jo. I see Christine has her hand up. Do you want to come in, Christine?
Thank you, Chair. Joe's already said one of the points I was going to mention, which is the review, and that change may be coming at us and we don't yet know at what pace as regards IJBs. But the other comments I have are very much in response to some of the comments already made, particularly around the point that Shona has just made about if we choose one name for the IJB and our logo for the IJB, then we must use that everywhere. Were the IJB a truly independent organisation of the two parties, then that might be possible. However, I would suggest, and I think Jan is still on the call, that legally it might not be possible for a number of reasons. Certainly in terms of the employment of staff, then staff are employed by the council or the health board. So in terms of any formal documentation regarding people's employment, then it would have to refer to the council or the health board. And any correspondence is likely to have the logo of one of the two parties on it. In terms of the actual partnership itself, then in the integration scheme and in various aspects of legislative directions, then there are the terms Health and Social Care Partnership and Integration Joint Board are used, and we can't stop using them in that context by having a new name that we've made up to suit this. I don't know and haven't had an opportunity to research this in terms of the other partnerships that do have a logo, but I am convinced in my own mind that when we do that, we'll find that we can't just use the one name. The other thing that I just remind colleagues is that they'll be aware that NHS Shetland, and there are plenty of NHS colleagues on the call that can tell me when I go wrong on this one. NHS Shetland, as I understand it, is a generic name that is actually the name used, but actually Shetland NHS Board is the proper legal term for the board, I think. So I think this is really complicated territory with a lot of legislation involved. That means that we can't just simply say, oh, sorry, I would advise that you can't just simply say, we will now call ourselves this, and this is our logo, and we'll never use the others again. Because in different contexts, in different parts, throughout all the work that is done across the Health and Social Care Partnership, which is a partnership between two employing parties who are governed by different rules and legislation, we won't be able to do that, certainly not at this stage. And then whatever that very complex legislative framework is that we work within at the moment, as Joe said, it is apparently quite likely it will change. So if we're talking about confusion, doubtless I've just added to it. Apologies for that, but I do think this is not as straightforward as it seems. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Christine. I see Brian wants to come in now, so Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was just to add on to maybe what Christine's just said there. I do know that some of the other IJBs, when they're issuing agendas and things like that, have the IJB in name, but the Health and Social Care Partnership logo, and some of them do actually specify it's the Health and Social Care Partnership, but they are used on the same header. So I don't think the logos in logo of the name of the IJB per se, and I acknowledge your points about the NHS and the NHS board and what the legalities are. I think the logo was a way of conveying the partnership working and the identity for those who work within the partnership.
Thanks, Brian. Jan, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Only really to support what Brian Chittick and Christine Ferguson have already said to you. I had viewed the reference to the partnership as being the uniting factor between the separate legal entities of the IJB, the NHS and the Council. And to that extent, the logo fulfilled that role. What I expected is what Brian has described, and that is that on certain matters, then that partnership logo would be used alongside the logo of the separate organisation. And perhaps there is something, it's difficult to imagine precisely when the IJB alone would be responding on a matter without engaging either the NHS or the Council, but there might need to be something that simply identifies the IJB as a separate entity. And then the partnership logo can be used by all three in correspondence as and when required. And I think that would fulfil Christine's point about, for example, one being when you're dealing with matters that employ staff associated with the partnership. I took the sentiment perhaps in what Mr. Guyan was saying to be more about how the IJB promotes itself, and that frequently comes up in conversations from board members. And there are a number of initiatives, including the establishment of the website, as Joe referred to. So I think if we separate the issue of promoting the IJB and its value as separate from the question of how the partnership has a logo to represent the three equal partners, then I think that the recommendation in the report, has something to commend it.
Thanks, Jan. I suppose my concern is the timing of it with the review of adult social care and the likelihood. I mean, obviously we don't know what's going to happen, but the likelihood that some changes will come to IJBs in the future. I just wonder if the timing of this is really appropriate, because there is a good chance that IJBs will change how they look going forward. So it just seems like if we were to go with a logo now and then had to potentially change in the future, it just doesn't seem like maybe the best timing, and something that could maybe be left and revisited when we had a better idea. It was just my thinking. Robbie, do you want to come in?
First of all, my apologies. Everything crashed and I've only just got back in again. So if I'm repeating stuff that's already been said, I have concerns about discussing this in view of the workload the officers have at the moment. And I would support what you've just said. I don't see any harm in waiting for a little while until the IJB changes are implemented. and then perhaps look at it, would be my view. Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. Does anybody else want to come in on this? Jane?
I support that as well.
Thanks, Jane. Does anybody not? I mean, if anybody wants to press ahead with this, then I'm happy to have that discussion. No? So are we happy to revisit it in the future? Is that how we're going to leave it? I'm not sure, Joe. I was going to say, do you want to come back in and advise?
Thanks. Yes. Sorry about that. Yeah. I mean, that's perfectly fine. And I wonder if, yes, I think what you're suggesting is that once we're clearer about the future of IJBs, although this logo is intended for the Health and Social Care Partnership, I understand the concern about the future shape of IJBs and what that might mean, and what that then might mean for health and social care partnerships. And so I think we'd be happy with that suggestion that it's delayed until we're clear about what that future would be. And I suppose in the meantime there is the need to keep working on the engagement strategy and the role of how the IJB is shown to the public in terms of what it does deliver as well. So we'll carry on working on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Joe. Did you want to come back in, Robbie?
No, I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
It's just your hand was up. Okay, do we have to do anything? I've lost my agenda. Joe, do we have to do anything? Oh, Liesl.
I think Liesel's got her hand up.
Thank you, Liesl.
It would just be helpful for the minute if you wanted to say that you're recommending deferral of the decision until the review is completed, or words to that effect. I'll leave you to make up the words yourself. But
okay, so we are going to defer this item until a later date when we have a better idea of what IJBs may look like going forward. Is that okay? Is everybody okay?
That's fine,
with that?
thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And we'll move on to item 4, which is the COVID-19 vaccination update, and Brian is going to talk us through that one.
Thank you, Chair. This is just an update report, just to inform members of just where the vaccination programme is. But I think also I just wanted to draw out some elements about the sourcing of various elements of the programme from delegated services and the impact this will have potentially on the delivery of services moving forward. The aim of the programme was to undertake a vaccination programme that would prevent mortality, morbidity, serious illness, hospital admissions, and decrease the impact of the pandemic on hospital and health services. The programme is developed about what vaccine we will have available in Shetland, and I think that's a very important point, as we've developed a hybrid approach to the delivery of vaccinations, and that being between occupational health service in NHS Shetland, primary care, and mass vaccination centres that we've established already in Lerwick, namely the Independent Living Centre out in Grimmaster and the Gilbertson Park Sports Hall. So they are both up and running at the minute, and the aim is to bring on a third mass vaccination centre in Scalloway Sports Centre on the 1st of March. There's 2 vaccines being used at the minute in Shetland, and that's the Pfizer and AstraZeneca, Oxford AstraZeneca. And there is no choice of vaccine in Shetland at the minute. It's just people are vaccinated with the vaccine that we have in stock at that time when they're called forward. I think a real positive thing is, we've vaccinated well over 7,000 people at the minute, and it is really progressing well. And this week we are starting second doses in our care home residents, and that starts tomorrow. And I think that's an indication of how we're trying to protect those who are most vulnerable in our communities, and how we've prioritised that. With respect to the other priority groups for first doses, we've now started on what we're calling priority group 6, which is unpaid carers and those individuals with underlying health conditions aged from 16 to 64. It may be just worth noting that the unpaid carers has actually been the most complex and difficult preparations for vaccination in the groups that we've done already. And that's partly because of the information that we needed to call people in comes from a variety of sources. So there was a little bit of preparation work to pull together all the lists of those who needed to be called forward. We've now done that, and we've now started to call everybody in that priority group forward for their vaccine. Just to say, the vaccine flow is slowing down, and that's not just applicable to Shetland. That is a nationwide slowdown that has been highlighted. We're working with Scottish Government on a weekly basis to maximise the amount of vaccine we're getting into Shetland to realise the outcomes we need with our vaccination programme, and we are making some leeway in our request to have some more vaccine front-loaded into Shetland as well. I think I just also wanted to highlight the input of true partnership working in delivery of the programme. Whether that be NHS, SIC, Red Cross and Third Sector, Scottish Ambulance Service and Scottish Fire Rescue Service, Coast Guard, as well as actually the patients themselves. We've had a really high uptake of vaccinations in Shetland, which has been really positive as well. Unexpected in the fact that we were planning for about an 85% take up, but we've exceeded that in all the age groups that we've completed so far. So I think that has been really positive as well, and just demonstrates, Shetland PLC realizing that, the individual responsibility. If we can, get vaccinated, then it will help Shetland get out of the pandemic collectively. I think I just wanted to highlight, this could be an ongoing vaccination program and become aligned to something like the flu on an annual, flu program, which is delivered on an annual basis. And I think Elizabeth Robinson will be talking next about remobilisation planning, but I think it is something that we consider moving forward, that this vaccination program may be something that will be required in what we're terming living with COVID kind of thematic, that we may need to do this again. And if so, how would we do that? Because the dependency on the services, especially delegated services, to deliver this programme has been quite hefty. And I don't think we could sustain that if we are also wanting to recover and remobilise other parts of our service delivery as well. So I think that's one of the reasons I maybe brought this report to IJBs, just to highlight the ongoing sustainability discussion that may need to take place once we get through the initial tranche of vaccinations, which is occurring at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that update, Brian. Okay, we'll open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions for Brian on that one? Jim?
Brian, in where are we? Paragraph 416, you give performance, which shows how many we've had vaccinated with the first dose, and we've got 100% over 80s. Is that the people that have agreed to have it, or, I mean, it'd be nice to know how many people are not having it.
Yeah. So that's of the cohort sizes that we've been given by Scottish Government. So that's actually our designated cohort sizes. So if there was any difference in that, that would be the people who have declined to take it up. And I just also need to say, there is some overlap in some of these kind of age groupings as well. So, for example, some of our care home residents, you know, will fall into some of the age groups, which will affect the figures as well. So, you know, whilst the figures are helpful, they're not, you know, they're not a definite kind of, there will be statistical kind of variance in just what we're reporting. I think what I just wanted to demonstrate there was that the uptake has been high, which is, you know, right across all the age groups. And you know, the over 70s and over 65s, they weren't completed. So this was, you know, before we had our mass vaccination clinics on the 15th as well. So they will have increased as well.
Thank you, Brian.
Jane?
Thank you. It is incredible, isn't it? Just the whole uptake, and it is really Shetland PLC. I'm just wondering, Brian, if this would be a useful point. You've got that projection of delivery and it's looking, you know, 31st of May. So is this an opportune moment to talk about the advice? Because people will have had a vaccination, but there still will be a considerable amount of people who haven't. And also just to clarify our message going out to people about, you've had your vaccination, but what is the key message about protecting ourselves and the community?
So thank you for raising that, Jane. It's a very sort of important point as well, just where we are on the vaccine programme. You're absolutely right. Some have had a first dose, very few have had a second dose. It does take time for once you've been vaccinated for, you know, the full effect to take place. And what I've been saying all along the way is a vaccination is not in place of or instead of all the good sort of self-protective measures that we've been doing, like the facts advice that we're putting out on a regular basis. It's on top of. And, you know, I think just as we, you know, maybe reflect on where we've been as an island community since Christmas, where we did have an outbreak, you know, there may be a kind of thought process that this is a golden bullet and a quick golden bullet that will get us out of the outbreak kind of mentality that we've had, but that won't be the case. It will take time to get through the whole population with not just one dose but 2 doses, and that's also the complexity of the programme. Is it's unlike flu, which is a 1 dose vaccination. This is a 2 dose kind of programme. So it will take time, and we're also just asking people to be patient, because you know, our aim has always been to offer everybody in Shetland an opportunity to be vaccinated. But just with where we are with vaccine flow and just the number that we've got to vaccinate, you know, bearing in mind this is you know, a vaccination programme unprecedented. We've not done something like this before, not just in Shetland, but right across the whole NHS. So I think that would be a second message is, you know, we will get there, but you just need to be patient with us.
Thank you, Brian. I think that was a really opportune moment to make that point. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm not seeing anybody else come off mute. I do have a question, but it's probably a question that isn't answerable by anybody here. It's probably a broader question for the Scottish Government to answer, I suppose. So I'll ask it anyway. So we'd read at 2.2 that the aim of the COVID vaccine programme initially is to prevent death and serious illness, hospital admissions and other impacts on the health services, which is obviously important. I think the general feel from the public was that excitement once there was a vaccine, and the perception that once we had a vaccine and most vulnerable people had been vaccinated, then life could start to look a little bit more normal. So people, for example, think that once care centre residents have they've all had their both doses, then they would be allowed to have normal visitors, such as their children and all their loved ones around them once more. The reality, however, would seem much different. And although the rollout and the vaccine is going well across Scotland, we don't seem to have much information on when it will reach that tipping point. So given the fact that there's still a lot to learn about the vaccine and it needs to be given every year and so on, is there a risk that we'll only ever keep it at 2.2, which is really important, absolutely, but will it not actually make the difference in allowing care centres to return to normal? And I appreciate that's a difficult question and probably not one that you can answer, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I'm happy just to come in with, you know, the point that Scottish Government are announcing next week their route map, you know, and their exit strategy out of the pandemic in the next stages. And I'm sure it will have been considered the volume and the tempo of vaccinations, especially with the prioritisation of that priority one group being care home residents and those in residential care and those who look after them. It may just change the risk profile and the risk appetite, you know, to maybe open up in some of the areas that you've outlined. You know, I think there's, you know, the holistic picture, but I think also there will be a thought process that probably this is the first time we're sort of considering a route map with people who are vaccinated, and that may just change the dynamic slightly. I've not been pre-read into anything, but I'm sure that will be sort of one of the risk factors, and that will be discussed. But I also noticed Elizabeth Robinson's put up her hand, so maybe from a public health perspective, they may be able to feed into some of your question.
Thanks very much, Brian. Yeah, that'd be really helpful, Elizabeth. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Elizabeth.
Sorry, I'm not sure that I've got any more clarity in terms of answers than Brian has, but I think we're only just starting, as Brian says, this week to start the second round of vaccinations in care homes. So we obviously need to give 3 or 4 weeks for that to feed through. I think that we've still got all the shielded population, so we've got a lot of other people with vulnerabilities within our community, and we would want for them to be protected before we made strong recommendations for lockdown to be completely suspended and us to go back to work, to life as normal. But we don't yet know that vaccinations will have to be an annual event, so it may be that they don't have to be. It may be that they become biannual, or every 4 years or something like that, in the same way as tetanus vaccinations are for some people. So all of those things are still up in the air. So our chief executive, our public health director, the chief executive of the local authority and the leader of the council are all having ongoing conversations with government all the time about which level we're in. So we're still in level 3 as opposed to level 4, which other areas of the country are in, and we'll continue having those conversations. And as we feel safer and we feel more able to let go, we will be strongly encouraging that, because we absolutely recognise the ongoing toll of lockdown, the inability to visit relations in care homes, the inability to gather together in social groups, and the inability to get our economy going in the way that we would want to. So we wouldn't be arguing for us to remain in lockdown any longer than we needed to. So I don't know if that probably doesn't entirely provide reassurance, but maybe helps to move us in the right direction.
Thanks very much for that, Elizabeth. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much about lockdown. I mean, I appreciate that there's lots of reasons why we are in this situation we're in, and I understand that. It was more that just when that tipping point comes, when enough people have been vaccinated, that we can allow things like contact within a care centre. I mean, there's residents there, and it's that human rights. People have a right to have contact with their loved ones. There's people in care centres who've not had a loved one touch them for nearly a year. That, to me, is, I understand it's very, you want to keep people safe, and I absolutely appreciate that. But it's that balance of harms that I suppose is kind of playing on my mind, and it is a difficult one, and I totally appreciate the challenges. I was just trying to understand at what point does the vaccination open up that to people? That was all. Do you want to come back in, Elizabeth?
Specifically around that point in terms of care homes, again, I don't have an exact answer, but we do have so many protections in place now, and once we know that carers have been vaccinated, I think, and care home staff have been vaccinated, and we've got all the testing, very thorough testing procedures in place for staff, visitors and residents in care homes, I think we'll move quite quickly after that. So I hope that wouldn't be, please don't quote me on this, but I hope that wouldn't be more than a sort of month or 6 weeks away.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate that and the amount of work that's gone in to keeping our care centres safe, and you know, the partnership working that's gone on, I think, has been fantastic. And across the whole vaccination process, there's been excellent partnership work, and Shetland is doing a really, really good job. So I don't want to sound like I was being negative with my questioning at all, because I have nothing but praise for everybody who's been involved, and I would like to take that opportunity to thank everybody for everything they're doing. So yeah, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on that? Jane?
Just to say that the IJB has, for a number of years, struggled to get enough people to recognise themselves as unpaid carers. And I think the work that Shetland Carers have done, and the people have realised that is what they are doing, and how important that job is. So I would like to say from an IJB point of view that that's a real positive as well. We now have people who can come forward for us. And the other one is that Shetland recognised that personal assistants are also have been perhaps more recognised in the whole procedures as well. So I think that's two very positives there, as well as everything else. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. No, that's really good points, because those are positive things to mention. Does anybody else want to come in? I'm not seeing anybody else come off mute, so we are being asked to note the progress in the COVID-19 vaccination and note the possible enduring nature of the COVID-19 vaccine programme. Are we all happy to do that? I'm not hearing anybody say no, so I'm going to say yes, that we're all happy to note. Okay, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, and that's Elizabeth with Public Health and Planning and the Remobilisation Plan update.
Thank you. So, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
Thank you. On an annual basis, health boards are asked to develop an annual operating plan, which is the operational sign-off, negotiation and sign-off between the Scottish Government and the Health Board about what they will deliver on an annual basis. This year, and following on from last year's the COVID immobilisation plan, and then a remobilisation plan that was developed in August last year, we've been asked for our annual operating plan to be developed as a third remobilisation plan. Now, the request came to Chief Executive of Health Boards, but there's a clear expectation that it's developed in partnership in conjunction with IJBs. And so I have been working very closely with the Health and Social Care Partnership, with the officers, to develop what at the moment what they're looking for. The government is looking for a very high level action plan, and what I was hoping to do today was just to present, and it is literally the headlines at this moment, to you and understand whether you feel that that's going in the right direction. Obviously, I will then take on board that your views and opinions and put those into the next iteration that goes to government, and then it's an ongoing process of discussion, negotiation up till around May, which is when the Scottish Government will normally sign off our annual operating plan. There will be costs associated with the plan, additional costs, additional funding from what we normally receive, and for 2021 we heard that we were given everything that we had asked for in terms of funding, so we do hope that that might be a similar offering over this next year. So I think those were the main points that I wanted to make. So as yet, what I'm presenting you with, as I said, it's very high level. It doesn't contain elements like risks and funding, but I suppose I'm wanting to understand from you whether you think it's going in the right direction and if you think there are glaring gaps. I did do the same presentation to the Health Board on Tuesday, so we're obviously trying to develop this in tandem with both, I won't say both organisations, both groups, and understand how we fit it together and what the sort of governance and approval route is, because that's obviously very complex. So are you happy? And the presentation came out yesterday or the day before, I think. Would you like me to actually do the presentation, or are you happy that you've had time to read it and able to comment on it?
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'll just ask people what their views are. I'm happy I've read it and happy to leave it there, but if other people would like you to present it, I'm happy to do that as well. Anybody? Silence never. I'll take that as everybody's read it and they're all raring to ask you questions, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Jim, go ahead.
Afternoon, Elizabeth. My only concern is that there's no mention of unpaid carers anywhere and support to unpaid carers. Right? You know, I mean, even in the letter that was sent from the Scottish Government, was it Scottish Government? No. From
yes.
The Director of NHS or whoever it was. You know, I mean, the only mention of unpaid carers was in when people were coming out of hospital, right? But there's no mention here, and I think that something needs to be done. It's the support for unpaid carers in the community-based care section.
Okay. Yep.
Right. I think that was all I had. No, because the third sector was mentioned. No, that's it. That was all my only thing I had. If we could get something in about supporting unpaid carers, please.
Thanks, Jim. Does anybody else have any questions? Robbie?
Thanks, Chair. Just probably too general a question. I note that funding's going to be available for this. There are other resources other than financial ones. Are we happy that we have the resources in place to remobilise properly and deal? Well, you know, I have great concern about the pressure that all staff have been under over the last few months. I'm trying to tread carefully here. Remobilisation is a great idea, but I would like to think that we had in place the finance, which is important, but more importantly, the people resources. I hope there's nothing critical in what I'm saying there. I'm trying to support.
Thanks, Robbie.
That's very helpful, thank you. There is also, and it's a slightly different timescale, but the government has also requested a 1-year workforce development plan, and I know that human resources within the NHS and SIC are meeting to develop that plan. So what I'm doing as part of this remobilisation plan, I'm looking at the resources, financial and in terms of people, and that will then feed into more developed workforce plan. And I understand that there's a requirement from the government for a 3-year workforce plan to support health and social care partnerships, which is due in the following year. So effectively there's a 4-year programme of work that's looking at workforce to support health and social care and workforce development on an ongoing basis. The vast majority of the resources that we put in for last year and will be putting in for this year are staff. So initially there were resources that were used around making shifts within the hospital, enabling us to have COVID safe areas and non-COVID areas, but the majority of that work is now complete, and the majority of the funding that we will be requesting is for staff, and we've had reasonable success in recruiting to those staff.
That's really good, thank you, Elizabeth. Do you want to come back in at all, Robbie?
No, just to repeat, I have concerns for the mental health and the well-being of staff, and I'm very happy to hear that these things are being addressed, as I knew they would be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. I think those are really important points. Edna Mary, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, having trouble with my buttons too. Just having read the letter, Elizabeth, as well, it makes reference, of course, to the community treatment and care services. And I think in our local slides there, we haven't actually really maybe said much about that, because I think that's maybe one of the ways that in terms of remobilisation, it's not just about remobilising what we had before, it's actually maybe about doing some of these things more differently. And so the community treatment and care services, that's something that actually maybe takes, it's a different way of working from what we've currently had, but it also probably helps support the fact that we will need to have a slightly different workforce structure and service delivery type structure going forward. So obviously I'll provide some detailed feedback for your remobilisation slides, but I just wonder if we're maybe missing that kind of thing, that we're actually thinking it is about getting services back up and running, but maybe needing to think a little bit more about the structure of some of these.
Thanks, Edna Mary. Jane?
Thank you. Yes, it was building on what Edna Mary was saying there as well, in that the inequalities that were present and have been present over a period of years, those are still there, but now we have different inequalities, and I think it's just grappling with that, with our systems, and looking at from a community led support ethos, and how do we actually grasp this as a positive of change, because the inequalities, they have changed. The people who have been adversely affected within COVID, the research has shown that that's a different set of people than people who have experienced inequalities, who are still experiencing inequalities. So it's widened that. So I think if we think of it as community, then we can look at the systems and the localities. So I echo what Edna Mary is saying, but I'm delighted that the inequalities is so clear there. It's just what that actually means. So thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Jane. Jim, do you want to come back in?
Sorry if I'm going over something, so I had to go out for a minute. Mental health. I think we should also bring in the fact that we work with third sector, Elizabeth, in this, in their programme for treating people with mental health. There's no mention of our collaboration that we've got with the third sector.
Yeah, and in the narrative, I suppose I'm probably using shorthand in the presentation by describing that whole system approach, but in the narrative, which you haven't got in front of you, that's absolutely what I'm saying. And actually, the way that communities look after each other, and then we use third sector. And we have that sort of triangle approach to care. So we should be using the lowest possible level of intervention to support and help people. So if people's friends and families can support them, that's the optimum that we should be looking at, and only pushing people into services when they're actually needed, so that we're not medicalising mental health, and I suppose or often assuming that it can be fixed with an intervention or with medication.
Right. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Jim. And thanks for those points, Elizabeth. I think that is the key thing, isn't it? It's about supporting communities to support one another through this. I mean, everybody has had different experiences during this pandemic. And like Jane was saying, these inequalities they're different. Some of the ones are still there from before, but there's now people who maybe hadn't been impacted before, and now because of COVID they're living a different life and they have different challenges, and I think because of that we do need to change our focus somewhat. So the things that we might have prioritised previously, I think we have to kind of get our heads into what is going to be our priorities going forward, and supporting people to support communities to look after one another, I think is really important. And things like mental well-being, it can start so simply as something that you can do yourself, and once you look after yourself then you can look after your family, and it spreads into this bigger, wider thing. But yeah, I think there's a lot in here that I think is really good and important, but I think it's going to be a challenge to ensure that we have the capacity to tackle everything. And I think it's recognising that we can't do everything all at once as well, because we don't have the ability to do that. So yeah, I welcome the focus on the things that are in here, and I'll let Shona in.
Hi. It was really going back to what Jim was saying and what Elizabeth then went on to say, because as Elizabeth said, we had this conversation just a couple of days ago, and I love how conversations, the same one, end up happening. So I was kind of speaking about, I think, how we're working at the moment, or how, for example, leisure centres are interacting with people, has opened up a whole new kind of area of maybe more intimacy in terms of, like, for example, part of a Facebook fitness group, and there's a whole different thing that goes on with what people speak about and what they might disclose to their instructor, who normally they would just exercise in front of, and it's a whole different kind of interaction and way that we're having with people, which I think when you talk about the kind of tiers, recognising that whole community bottom-up approach is just so crucial. So I think it's a really good start to what will obviously develop and continue.
Thanks, Shona. Yeah, I think that's really good points. And there's so many examples of things working differently and people just kind of embracing change, that I think it's a good opportunity to try doing things differently, I think. Did you want to come back in at all, Elizabeth? Sorry.
I think it was just to reassure people that we've seen so much change as an entire community, as a world. We've seen so much change over the last year, and I think we feel, and led by Brian within the Health and Social Care Partnership, we feel so strongly that we should hold on to the good changes. So the things that have changed and made a difference, keep those, and maintain that ability of the community to come together and support each other in the way that we saw the sort of Shetland Scrubs programme happen, and the way that people have come together and supported each other. And it's building on all of that, and the more people, there's that sort of critical mass, isn't there? So the more people that start behaving in a positive way, supporting each other, being kind, being helpful. Sorry, I get a bit, I'm getting a bit sort of idealistic here, but I think it's the direction that we should be moving in, but absolutely underpinning that with the right resources, the right staff, the right supportive frameworks that we have, and the prioritisation of the work that we're planning to do based on the evidence that we have is the right way to be doing that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And it does sound like we're all on the same page, so that's helpful. Nobody's come up with anything today that is not already seen as a priority, so I think it's good. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to add at this stage? I'm not seeing any hands up. Shauna, is your hand just up from previously, or did you want to come back in?
It's what they call a legacy hand, apparently.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Thanks. Okay, so we're being asked to comment and discuss, which I think we've done, and approve that the Chief Officer is acting as the IJB representative in this planning process. Are we all happy for that? I think so. Thanks very much, Elizabeth. I think that's been really helpful. Okay, if we move on to item 6, and that's Brian for the IJB Business Programme and IJB Action Tracker.
Thank you, Chair. So maybe just start with the action tracker. I have updated it from the actions that have come forward, and we've completed off quite a few of the actions. There's some still ongoing, which will involve presentation of papers at future meetings. And that kind of takes us on then to the next meeting is our last meeting in this financial year. We've not laid down too many meetings in the future, just due to just where we are with still being on an emergency footing, and just where offices are with their focus on vaccination programs, COVID outbreaks, care home assurance, all those kind of things as well. So that's probably why members may be wondering why there's nothing too much in the future. I think if we maybe just delve into the next meeting, which is due on Thursday, the 25th of March, I think I've probably been a little bit over ambitious with maybe what business we aim to get through. We also got to just consider that this meeting today was meant to be discussing a lot of the finance and budgeting activity, especially for the next financial year. And as that work hadn't been completed prior to the meeting, it wouldn't have given our Chief Finance Officer and the finance teams enough time to prepare for papers, etc., and reports. So we've moved that to the next meeting in the 25th of March, which will be close to the deadline at the end of the financial year. So if members are happy, I think maybe we just need to really focus in that meeting on our financial monitoring report, our budget, which will be linked to workforce planning, our midterm financial plan, and our performance. And the one other one that I think is probably important to get through, as there is a timeline on it, is the scheme of integration review. There may also need to be a paper linking some of the next financial year with direction setting, which should be a short paper coming forth as well. But what I'd be asking is maybe the papers on transitions, right to advocacy, remobilisation update, Community Justice Partnership update and the service recovery are taken off any radar of the next meeting, and we just focus on the finance, the budgeting, and the kind of issues related to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Sorry, I had an issue there. Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I'll just open that up to anybody else to see if anybody's got any questions on that. Jane?
Thank you. I agree that the focus of the meeting should be on those that you have there, absolutely. I would say that the transitions, I do think that is something that is part of the whole recovery and part of the finance moving forward. So I would appreciate even just a time to have, because it was the last meeting, it was to defer it to this one. So I would appreciate some form of opportunity to have those discussions, albeit maybe not as a paper and maybe not in this particular meeting, but I do think that we really can't lose sight of there are young people within our community, the very ones that we've been speaking about, having inequalities, and we really, I don't want, papers fine not coming, but I do want it to remain as a priority area. So I don't know how you do that, but it was just a plea, I suppose.
Thanks, Jane. Do you want to come back in, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's just to provide Jane a bit of reassurance that this is sort of priority work that we've been talking, amongst the kind of partnership teams and the executive managers involved there, and making those linkages. And we are had some discussions with the Chief Social Work Officers as well about sort of pulling together a project that will prioritise and start to address some of the gaps that are there. So I think there was a little bit of thought that maybe also the transitions paper or report or update or whatever you want to call it for the next meeting might just be a little bit too early to allow just the thought processes about what needs to be covered in this project to be moved forward. So I think it was just to provide you some reassurance that we have prioritised it and we are sort of operationalising it, if that makes sense, to actually do some activity around this that will hopefully make the changes that I think you're quite rightly allude to.
Thank you. Thank you. That does provide an assurance there, and therefore I'm happy for that paper to be dropped from the next meeting. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks for highlighting that, because it is something that we don't want to lose sight of. It is important. It is difficult trying to manage these meetings with busy agendas when people are so stretched already for time and trying to come with papers. And I appreciate the time it takes to get all those papers through and the time it takes to be at a meeting when everybody is so busy. So yeah, thanks to everybody for doing what they're doing. I think everybody's doing a great job. Does anybody else have any further comments or questions on this one? Not seeing anything. No, so do we have what have we been asked to do with this one? So we've been asked to review the action tracker, note that the IJB business programme will need to be flexible, and approve the business plan for the financial year to 31st of March, appreciating that that is only one more set of meetings. So do we have, I should probably know this, do we have meetings in the diary then going forward after March?
And maybe look towards Lisa or Anne for definitive advice. I know they've been discussed, but I'm not sure if they've been actually confirmed.
Okay.
Yes, Chair, we do have meetings scheduled in the diary up to the end of June, so we'll get those out to members and we'll come with dates for the rest of the year to the next meeting, but we'll get those out to members shortly.
That's fine. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so I think that concludes our business for today. So thank you everybody for your attendance today and your contributions. And again, just to thank everybody who is working incredibly hard in health and social care at the minute, whether it be with the vaccine programme or any of the other things that are ongoing. Just, yeah, I hope you do manage to get a little bit of a break at some point, and thank you all very much. So that's the end of the meeting.
Thank you.